Good afternoon. Thank you, Mike. I am Joy Cunningham, and I'm a justice of the Illinois Supreme Court. And I am substituting for our retired Chief Justice, Ann Burke, who had intended to be here and couldn't be here today. Now, I don't have any slides like my colleagues over here, so you're going to have to just listen to what I have to say. And most of what I'm going to say is based on what these very smart and capable researchers had to say earlier. So the topic of mass attacks in the United States is unfortunately really timely and really ubiquitous. It's all around us. And, I think we're suffering from an epidemic. I don't think anybody is surprised by that. And having experts in criminology and others who have joined with the Isaac Ray Research Program is a significant step, in my opinion, because it brings together all the issues of behavioral health and issues of criminal behavior and the effects of all of that and mass lethal attacks and how that continues to plague our country. I was blown away by the collective wisdom at this table of all of these researchers and the work that the Secret Service is doing. All of that is very, very important. The topics and the quality of work we've learned about today indicates that there is not only rigorous research and researchers who are doing this work, but a recognition that there needs to be answers to these very vexing questions of mass violence with which we're surrounded. As Dr. Brooke described in his abstract, he said, it's an intractable public health problem. Well, while this problem, I believe, is beyond the reach of any one person, and I think you heard that from all of the collective comments, this is not a one person problem nor a one person solution. Each of us can offer ideas to address the problem so that we can label them seemingly intractable, not completely intractable, but thereby really just moving towards not only recognition of this ubiquitous problem that seems to be, in my view, almost uniquely American, but beginning to craft solutions. That's what we need to do. So the research which we discussed today, I think exposed all of us, certainly me, to the analysis and the data and the frequency of this kind of mass violence. We hear about this stuff, we read it in the newspapers, but we've all become almost desensitized to it. I can remember when Columbine first happened. Yes, I'm that old. I was old then, and I can remember the Columbine massacre clearly, and it was shocking to all of us. But since that time, there have been so many Columbines, people can't even remember what they were or when they started. And every so often you'll say, did you hear about so-and-so? And you think, no, because it's become so commonplace. We don't really highlight it the way we should and the way our researchers have told us. We need to collectively come together. This research that I heard about today really blew me away. It fits together well to inform our thinking of the possible solutions that Dr. Alfieri talked about. I mean, who knew that the Secret Service had this whole program? Did anybody here? Maybe you're all university people, so maybe you knew. I knew about it because I'm a judge of the Supreme Court, but before I became a judge, did I know about this? No. But there's a lot of interesting and important work that's being done, and I think we need to make sure we are informed about this. It fits together well to inform our thinking. And when you look at the underlying characteristics of mass murderers that Dr. Brooke described and the examination of the risk factors, the indicators of trauma-induced threats, which Dr. Hanlon described, and most importantly, as Dr. Brooks indicated in his work, just how institutions like public health systems, professionals, and all of these other entities who are interested could use this data and understanding and identifying the connections between behavioral health and violence. Now, as I said earlier, I don't have a lot of slides, but I took a lot of notes as these very learned people were talking, and there was a common theme throughout everything that they said, and I continue to be in awe of the research that's been done. That's the issue that everyone is talking about, and it's a good place for me to really share my thoughts. So I start by asking, what should we do with the research that we learned about today? And how do we helicopter back up to 5,000 feet and look at this from a very broad perspective, look at their body of work from a very broad perspective and try to craft solutions? Because of course I'm not a researcher. I'm here as feel like a student today who's heard a great set of lectures from very learned professors who didn't ask me any questions, so I could just actually sit and listen and learn. And I gathered a lot of information today, and I expect and hope that all of you have as well. But in reality, I'm only a judge. I'm a judge, and judges are, we're just one factor in this whole equation that helps to put things together. And I'm going to digress a moment and respond a little bit to the comment from my colleague in the back who talked about being a victim of crime and how the police really didn't respond in a way that citizens would either want or expect, because the police, like the rest of us, they're all humans, they've become desensitized as well to this continuing mass crime. Nobody seems to do anything. And so I think this widespread desensitization has unfortunately spread to law enforcement. And there are those who will say that it may have spread to the judiciary. However, help is on the way, because there is a new, and most of you have read about it, the Pretrial Fairness Act, which says Illinois being the first state in the nation to eliminate cash bail, which many people took that to mean that criminals are now going to be running rampant. I submit to you that the opposite is going to be true, because under the new law, what is required is that the prosecutor has to make a motion to the judge, and a motion in legal terms is just to ask the judge to do something. And the prosecutor is the person that has to ask the judge to hold that person in custody. Now, I give presentations at what we call new judge school. When the new judges are appointed to the bench, they have to learn how to do their job. One of the things that I know and I hear, no judge is going to want to be the one who ruled against the prosecutor's motion and let that guy back out on the street so that he can commit another crime. So very quickly, and this law is very new. It hasn't been in effect a year yet, and we're seeing more and more people who would have probably been part of the revolving door crew. They're being held because the judges are human too, and they don't want to be the one who gets their name in the newspaper for letting this carjacker out, who not only carjacks another car, but maybe kills someone. So I think that the opposite effect of what the public expected from the Pretrial Fairness Act is what's going to really happen, because it really dismays me as a Supreme Court justice when I hear this kind of thing, that, he was released the same day and he went back out and did the same thing again, and then he was back in. Then when he finally comes to trial, he gets a slap on the wrist. As a judge, I don't like to hear that. And I'm not only a judge, but I'm a citizen. I live in Chicago. When I'm walking down the street, nobody knows that I'm a judge. I could be carjacked, or, well, not really, because I have Max. Max is in the back. Cece and everybody else. But it's one of those things that I think we all have to be concerned about. So I'm also a longtime advocate of mental health and behavioral health services and the elimination of stigma around those issues. I've done a lot of work in that arena because I think it's important. And I'm also a mother. And so I worry about the safety of my kid and my family. And young children today sadly are trained in school in how to prepare for gun violence, something that I never had to learn when I was in kindergarten. Now these kids have to figure out, they're taught just like a fire drill. Instead of having only fire drills, when we were in school, we had fire drills. Now they have fire drills, but they also have drills about what to do if a gunman or some other perpetrator insistent on performing some bad act in the school, whether it's with guns or some other weapon, what to do. I mean, that's a hard thing to add to the plate of young children, but that's happening. So it's my hope that the next step in this process, after the compelling information that we've heard about today, will be to have the Academy and the Center convene another important meeting of stakeholders to form a group at the national level to design a campaign directed to a composite of policymakers, individuals at the grassroots level, community institutions like faith-based organizations and not-for-profits. And I think you have to include faith-based organizations. Another digression. In certain communities, the faith-based organizations are the engine that people look to. I can think of Saint Sabina, Father Michael Flager, who may or may not be known to some of you. He's the Catholic priest that lives that has a church on the south side of Chicago. The gangs listen to him. He can convene a meeting of gang members and they'll listen to him. That's important. There's another church, Apostolic Church of God, where Dr. Byron Brazier is the pastor. He works with Father Flager, and they convene meetings of known gang members in the area, and they have managed to clean up an entire like square mile around that church because they have influence. So whatever we convene, I think certainly in communities of color, it has to include faith-based organizations. And so the research that we've heard today, I think, can inform professionals in crime reduction. You know, the police need to pay, our police department really need to pay attention, and behavioral health regarding how to identify those who threaten us and threaten our society. The information can also be used to prepare institutions such as our hospitals and churches and senior citizen residents, places where in the past you would never think you would have to do this kind of threat assessment and preparation for when something happens. But yes, we do. The data must also be woven into the policy debate about mental health services and, most important of all, in my opinion, sensible gun laws. So the policymakers need to understand where to invest resources, how to identify people who could be potential threats, where to invest in mental health services for those who pose a threat, and how to help the public understand this and the data that can be informative regarding who should have access to guns. We hear that all the time. Like, how did he get a gun? Well, because we're not really assessing who should have access to guns. And I will digress a little bit again. The Highland Park shooter, who you just heard, his father has pled guilty to I think it's a misdemeanor, but a high misdemeanor of signing an application allowing this young man to have the ability to get a firearm owner's identification card, which therefore allowed him to purchase a gun, which he then used to shoot up the Highland Park Independence Day parade and kill a bunch of people and hurt others. So the question, I think, is going to continue to be raised. Should parents and people who are caregivers, be held responsible for some of these acts? And I think one of the things that we need to push forward is what you heard here today. Everybody, we're in this together. When you recognize that something is amiss, say something and don't hope it'll go away, because usually it doesn't. So people must see that yet overlooked step is getting the substance of the message based on data, based on data, such as what we heard today, not only to stakeholders, but to our families and our friends and others who may be in a position to make a difference. We need to translate this research into a simple language to explain the threats to our communities, whether it's in the churches or in community organizations, but do that in a way that's all aimed at preventing these threats from becoming real events. That was the theme we heard today. We're all working together to keep threats from becoming events. So we have to see that at the heart of all of this is a very simple message. We all must be concerned about the lives of others. And I know that sounds like kumbaya, but it really isn't. We're all in this together, in that some people are living in tragic circumstances of poverty and alienation and other terrible situations, and they think no one cares. So we need to harness whatever resources we have, again, to recognize these people as potential threats, if you will, and how do we go about trying to ameliorate this in a way that makes sense for all of us. So there definitely needs to be leadership from stakeholders at the national level. And, again, another digression. As a Supreme Court justice, I talk to groups all the time, and I tell them state Supreme Courts have become so much more important than they used to be because of what's happening on the federal level, where what we used to look to the federal courts for in terms of protections and so on, a lot of that is no longer viable. So it's all being pushed back to state Supreme Court. So I think as a state Supreme Court justice, I am issuing a challenge and a call to my colleagues on the federal level to really look at this, because I think that there is a paucity of leadership on the national level that we really need to help us address this problem. So we have to learn to be aware of people in our community. For example, do we see behavioral changes in our neighbors? How about a family member that you know is suddenly acting weird and doing something that you think is a little bit out of kilter? Is that going to go away? Probably not. You've heard from our researchers today that these are all warning signs that we should not be ignoring. How about the young person that's sitting on a street corner begging for cash as you go by? Every one of us has to take responsibility to support people with behavioral health issues and direct them to assistance in order to get help. So how do we do that? We have to inform ourselves and try to find out where where's the help that we need. Someone referenced a toolkit. We have to know what's in the toolkit to help other people access it. For interpersonal violence, we need to have an impartial, clear, and simple risk assessment tool. And every family should have access to information to understand behavioral health symptoms and treatment options. This is really not pie in the sky. It's actually doable. And I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, when my predecessor, Justice Ann Burke, who should be standing here speaking to you today, but deputized me to do it, when she was Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, as you know, in the pandemic, everything came to a grinding halt, including the court system. Well, Illinois has 102 counties, and there's a courthouse in each one of them. And the Supreme Court is responsible for oversight of all of these courthouses all around the state. So how do we continue to have our court system functioning? Well, as you probably know, in government, everything takes a long time. So trying to figure that out, it was like turning an ocean liner around in the middle of the ocean. Normally it would take a long time, but Justice Burke was able to do this rather quickly, so that she crafted a system so that the courthouses, for example, in Hamilton County, which is a far downstate county with less people, Cook County, they had a system for operating in Cook County and a system for operating in Hamilton County that was peculiar to their needs. So maybe they did 3 days a week, where Cook County, because it's the largest county and everybody is always suing everybody else, and there's a lot in the courthouse here, it was every day we had to do, but Zoom was immediately instituted, and a lot of the judges who were dinosaurs and never opened their computers had to learn how to open the computers and do the things that needed to be done. And I tell you that because before the pandemic, if anyone had told me that some of these judges could be taught to use the computer, I would say never. It couldn't have happened, but it did. And not only did it happen, but post-pandemic, a lot of those systems have remained in place because the public and the lawyers have found that they're helpful. If you live in a downstate county, for example, the courthouse may be 50 miles away from your town. And if you have to go to court for a status hearing, what that means is you show up and the judge tells you, okay, you come back on another day for whatever your hearing is. So you've traveled 50 miles in one direction and 50 miles back for 5 minutes. Since the pandemic and Justice Burke's institution of this new system, you can do that on your computer, you can go to your public library, you're even allowed to do it on your smartphone. So you don't get defaulted any longer because you didn't show up. And all of those things, it's not related to what we're talking about here on one level, but on another level, it is, because it shows that if you are in a leadership position and you have the will to change something, I think you can. And so what we have to do is get those who are in leadership positions to get the will to change some of this. And I think we have a great base, because I'm saying this for probably the third time, I am just blown away by the presenters at this table and the research that they've done and how it all fits together. We can get this to our leaders, to our legislators, on the national level as well as on the state level. I think we may be onto something, because there's a real body of useful information out there that can inform our thinking in a way that will help us to do something about this. I don't think we want to go down in history as the country of the most gun violence ever that continues to grow. We can turn this ship around if we are interested in doing it. And although I'd like to see the impetus come from the federal government, I don't think that should stop us on the state level from doing what we're doing. And as you heard from Michelle, she talked a lot about some of the legislation that we have here in Illinois. And I'm thinking that some of that can be a model for other states and for the federal government if they're interested in doing this. So I will end by repeating the research and repeating that the research and information presented here today, when coupled with buy-in from stakeholders at the national level or at the state level, is our best hope of making inroads into the growing epidemic of mass violence. And I can tell you that I'm an optimist, so I remain optimistic, because the current path is not sustainable. You know, it just isn't. So we have to do something. We have a great baseline here in the research that's being done and being presented to help us start down that path to, I think, trying to shake off the notoriety of being the land of gun violence or mass violence. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll take questions if there are any that you have or you want to ask. Most people never meet judges, and so when they meet a judge, they want to ask about something else. So you can ask me anything you want that's related to judicial system or not. Well, this is the most quiet audience I've been before in a very long time.
Are you able to stay?
Yes, I am.
So maybe folks can ask you at lunch as well.
Okay.
Once the anxiety subsides.
Well, I have to ask my, I have 3 guests who are here with me, and if they can stay, I can stay. They're all staying, so I'm staying too. As I mentioned Max earlier, all Supreme Court justices, we all have a security marshal who goes everywhere with us because, as you heard before, there are a lot of crazy people out there. And it's always amazing to me how much threat is just out in the world against elected officials. So Max keeps me safe. Thank you all.
That's great. Thank you, Justice Cunningham, for summarizing the issue. So, please grab some food. My Jewish mother would be incredibly upset if we didn't.
From yourself.
We have this room until 1:30.
Oh.
So, presenters will walk around and schmooze, so grab some food and then we can continue the conversation. And I'll close out the online.
All of the.
Thank you, everyone.
Let me grab some.